When I started, it was just me, myself, and I.
Small business is not for the faint-hearted, right? It's a tough experience for absolutely everyone that gets in.
We are working in this AI world, and we need to be able to adjust and build from it. You're not going to have all the solutions up front.
I think the hardest part for me when I first started the business was teaching, coaching employees, team members. No, if you want to move to the next level, you have to understand that you can't grab onto everything.
Always strive to be better, not the best.
Welcome to the podcast From Cold to Close. My name is Saeed and I'm the founder here at SRC Growth Partner, a company that works with professional services firms from around the world to help them increase their revenue and profitability by acquiring new clients. My guest today is Evelyn Gallego, founder and CEO of EMI Advisors, a certified small minority-owned business dedicated to human-centered digital transformation that works with the government, commercial, and non-profit sectors. Evelyn herself launched EMI to deliver innovative and value-driven advisory services in digital health, interoperability, and health IT policy. She brings specialized expertise in aligning regulatory, technical, and business requirements to facilitate the effective adoption and utilization of cutting-edge technology. She is a recognized thought leader in critical domains such as care coordination, social care integration, health IT policy analysis and development, health data, interoperability, and data standards development. She also co-founded the Gravity Project, a leading national public collaborative focused on developing data standards on social determinants of health, SDoH. She also serves as a subject matter expert on numerous national and state level data interoperability initiatives, contributing her insights and leadership to advance health IT. And that was a massive rap sheet there, Evelyn, but it's absolutely a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, and good job. I know those were big words and different, not commonly used, so I appreciate you making
Yeah. Yeah, interoperability got me a couple of times, I've got to be honest.
not a common word. So
Yeah, no, I've not heard that one before. But I'm really looking forward to being able to have a really interesting conversation with you. The first place I'd like to start off with all of our guests and to give our viewers and listeners an opportunity to understand who you are and how you got to where you are today. Could you share a little bit more about your early days of your entrepreneurial journey and what motivated you to build a business at the intersection of health equity and digital transformation?
I know, big words, but together. No, absolutely. Happy to share my background. So just way of background, my building for my identity. So I am Canadian, born to Colombian immigrants, Colombia, South America. And I've been fortunate to spend a lot of my life living and working abroad outside of Canada, in France, in Ireland, and now in the US. My career trajectory following undergrad really began in the telecom and high tech sector. So I've always had a passion for technology and how to be able to use it to improve business and operations and to solve problems. So when I was a Canadian, as an expat living in France and then Ireland, that was really my foray into understanding systems, right? So really knowing that the world is a system of systems. And this was before the internet, like really thinking about the network effects of the internet, right? So, this is just understanding that as you move forward, there's cultural differences, there's, thinking about diversity, but also how does that apply to business practice? So I enjoyed my time in France so much that I decided to pursue an international MBA. And this was really, at the time, I wanted to build my business skills and transfer them to healthcare. So I always had a passion for healthcare, but my experience was really IT and portfolio management. So as a business student, I started learning more about international healthcare systems, complex problem solving. And then at the time I thought, again, this is also a pin for growth mindset. At the time I thought I'm going to go do my MBA, focus on big pharma, solving big pharma's problems at an international level. But as they say, life doesn't always take you the way you want it to go, right? You really have to shift. Nothing is linear. So I ended up meeting my husband, my American husband, as he was an expat in Paris, in France. And he ended up taking on a new role with the US federal government. So he moved back to the US and we moved together as a married couple to Washington, D.C. So I've been in the Washington, D.C. area for 20 years. But again, never with that mind of starting my own business. It was more like I want to now focus in healthcare management consulting. But at the time, again, very serendipitous. It was during the Bush administration here in the US had declared that every American would have an electronic health record by 2014. So that really initiated my foray into having a better understanding of health data, technology, and policy, right? So policy played a key role. So I was fortunate to be involved. Again, you go with the flow, you learn. And I built enough skill set that I decided 2009 to become an independent, start my own business. My husband and I then decided to we co-lead EMI. We started in 2013. And originally, both with a digital transformation mine mainly focused on the healthcare sector, federal government, both federal government, and then his in with the defense sector. And it's only been for the last 2 years that we've really brought it together and started looking at it from that human-centered systems thinking, digital transformation, and really thinking of how do we use that to help our clients, not only federal agencies, state agencies, and nonprofits, solve complex problems.
I absolutely love that. It's always so interesting to hear the journey someone goes from all the way from France and coming over and starting your business journey in 2009 of all times. As soon as you said 2009, I thought to myself, well, how about that? That's quite an interesting time to be choosing to go independent, going down in a direction where it's a much more risky than anyone else, and then being met with a world financial crisis that is affecting the world, right? So how did that affect the way you operated and it's obviously you've been operating now for a number of years, but from being independent and then going and transforming into what you are today, did that journey look like from an entrepreneurial career? What did that involve? How did you start off with it? Was there hiring challenges?
Yeah, no, it was hard, Saeed. So, you start, I think, again, to acknowledge that when I started, it was just me, myself, and I, right? It was really thinking through of what are the things I can do as an individual, as a subject matter expert, bring to help my clients solve their problems. And, initially it started that way. And then when my husband decided to, we create our own partnership was when we really we were forced to think about how do we grow this, right? And that has not been an easy trajectory, but I will acknowledge that what has been organic was because we certified, as you mentioned, as a economically disadvantaged women-owned small business, which allowed the government, and we got certified in 2015, to sole source to us. So meaning that we had a different vehicle by which to contract with our clients. And I would say that helped. And I really do see that. And to put a plug in for the Small Business Administration and small business opportunities here in the US, it really does help growth, right? And it helped us all of a sudden to shift and hire and create a workforce, right? And build the capacity needed for a small business to compete in the federal consulting space, right? And contracting space. So that I would say it was hard getting your feet off the ground and really putting in those best practices and creating an infrastructure to support it. And it continues to be a challenge because as we think through of expanding outside and given our current market situation with the federal government is thinking like, how do we better diversify our portfolio, which we were thinking about 2-3 years ago. So I would say we're fortunate in that regard today that we have a diversified portfolio, but at the time, very much focused on the federal government, but it allowed us to build the capacity needed and to build the skill sets of our team to be able to support our clients.
Makes a lot of sense. And sometimes it's really interesting to hear firsthand the help that it can provide, because small business is not for the faint-hearted, right? It's a tough experience for absolutely everyone that gets in. The idea of businesses is great and it's simple and it's like, oh, well, you just do this and this and people will come to me. And so it's really interesting to hear that part of your story. Your work itself, it sits at, I guess, a crossroads between policy, technology, and I guess collective impact. How has the famous 2-letter word AI and digital transformation reshaped your approach to leadership in these types of areas?
A lot. No, that's a great question because we can't ignore. It's not saying it's the elephant in the room. I really talk about it as the train has already left the station, right? We are working in this AI world and we need to be able to adjust and build from it. So I do think AI overall has changed, I would say, how we lead overall leadership. But I do, and as I say to my team, AI is a tool. It's not the solution for everything. It's a technology that we use to improve and create efficiencies in how we operate, but also to help solutionize or innovate. So you see it as both ways. And I do see it as a way to help solve complex problems, but it's something that you also need to better navigate and manage. I do believe leaders need to be intentional in how they use AI and how they encourage their team to use AI. Of course, that's working within collective impact and the intersection of health equity. We don't want to use AI and have it perpetuate further biases in the systems that we are working with, because we know they already inherit themselves, right? So we want to be able to keep that in mind, which I think helps us with our always having that health equity lens in everything that we do. We're keeping mind of that. So, and then when we think of developing solutions, we want to be able to look at it again from a systems perspective, right? And I say that in my line of work, health systems, social systems, human services system, environmental systems. So there's lots of systems that all of a sudden need to come together. And how do we enhance or better connect them using AI tools, right? And this is why I'm so passionate about what we do around human-centered design and systems thinking, because it forces us to really look at it from those lenses. Also, you mentioned collective impact, which is really around bringing, having a structured way of bringing diverse voices together, right? You want to make it easier to ensure that people with what we call here lived experience, people who are in the community experiencing issues or really benefit from having a way to better receive their benefits, enroll in a program, access to healthcare, right? You want to be able to ensure that the tools we create support them and not create burdens, right? So we think about not having technology be burdensome to the providers that are delivering care in the community, as well as the individual patients that receive and benefit from the services. So I think through that, there's so much potential in it, ensuring that we as a firm are conscious of the biases that may result from us using the tools, but not to move away from it. So I think that's also the part where I know there's some leaders out there that are very, again, it's like I said, the train has left the station. So it's not something you can avoid. It's like, folks that didn't, I always akin to like when email was introduced, right? It was a better form to communicate with someone than sending them a snail mail, right? So I just feel like that's where we're at right now.
I think that it's a really interesting point, and I love the fact that you reference it to email, right? Because it's actually a great like kind of relation there, because email is part of everyone's life. Like whether you're working or not, everyone's got an email address, right? And that's essentially what AI has got to a certain degree, and having something like AI in your day to day can also implement. For example, people are now using ChatGPT to search things more than Google. Well, not more than Google. Yeah, exactly. But people are yeah, exactly. So am I. I'm like, let me Google this. Actually, let me go chat GPT. It saves me a lot more time. I don't have to troll through loads of sites, and it tells me exactly what I need to know. It's fantastic. So I think it's really interesting. But you touched on a point which was human-centered systems thinking. And I really like that, because it's very easy to go, okay, we've got software, we've got technology, we're a technologically based society now, whether it's organizationally or individually. How does this kind of methodology, human-centered systems thinking, how does this kind of methodology set you apart from other consulting firms, especially when addressing complex data systems?
Thank you for asking that. So I do want to give credit where credit is due. Human-centered systems thinking, it does originate, so a lot of it from IDEO, right? So IDEO and Stanford have a lot of, so it's not something new, but what it is, it's a different way of applying for problem solving. So it's really using it outside, because human-centered design, a lot mainly attributed to developing product, right? And having tools and technology, but all of a sudden you're shifting and saying, how do we use it to actually solve policy problems, right? Care delivery. So you're not developing a tool at the end. There's not a product. but there is a solution, right? That could be low-hanging fruit solution. It could be. So we're seeing that more, and there's growing evidence around applying human-centered principles. And what I like the ideal concept of bringing them together, because it's not just looking at it from one group. Like, what I love about it, honestly, is really when you think of human-centered design and participatory design approaches, they're within a community, right? Or a local, like it's within a site. But when you apply a systems thinking lens, like you say, how does that apply with the overall system, right? Where they're at, where they're located, what other things they need to connect to. And that really brings another layer. And like I said, I didn't know it was called this. It was, again, it was things that we were grappling with as I started, and we can talk about the Gravity Project, but really around when I first started Gravity, we were looking at bridging health systems with human services system. Again, two systems that didn't talk to each other, siloed, right? But they served the same patient, as they transition. So it was really looking at those two separate siloed systems that needed to come together to support whole person care. And so systems thinking is then, okay, well, what about if we start bringing in environmental health, climate? What is climate's impact on an individual's overall whole person health, right? So you start looking at these, and then we have, other drivers, right? We say there's all these drivers of health, right? And we have to be able to bring them together and say, how do they interact? So that's really where I say a lot of our work is, and we want to promote. And it's not like an EMI, but it's our approach on how we do it. And like I said, we were doing it before I even knew it was called that. It's just now there is a framework that I can say it's really tied to those principles, and there is growing evidence around integrating.
It's always great when you've been doing something and you realize, okay, there's actually a term that actually, yeah, that's what it's called. Okay, I've been doing it all this time. Well, it's good to know, right? You touched on just there about the Gravity Project, and that's, I understand, a national initiative. And I guess you supported organizations through digital transformation. Is that right? What are some of the lessons, I guess, you've learned about scaling systems level change while staying true to your mission?
Sure. Yeah. So just for those not aware what the Gravity Project is, it's a project. So I do want to start with there. I co-founded it several years ago with the SARA, Social Interventions Research and Evaluation Network, out of the University of California in San Francisco. And it still is the national public collaborative that develops data standards to represent and exchange social determinants or social drivers of health data collected within a health system and shared outside of the health system. So that work was where I was introduced to these systems approaches and thinking, everything, moving it away from a health centric to a person centric. Right. So as a reminder, in general, we would say 99% of our lives are spent as people, right? 1% may be patient, but the healthcare system, given its costs and everything that, especially here in the US, it ends up having a heavier weight than our other outside of the health system. So Gravity was a lesson, as you said, around digital transformation. And the first lesson was that you had to bring everyone to the table, meaning that you had to bring not only, of course, usually it's your health system, your state agent, the payers, right? The people who are sponsoring this, the clinical provider that have the clinicians, their own mode of functioning, their own accreditations. And then you have to bring in the community-based organizations, right? So Gravity's success was really because we started, again, very human-centered. I know it was called participatory co-design at the time. I knew that was just the way to solve problems, to develop data standards. And I really looked at it from how do we ensure there's adoption, right? Because you don't want to create something that no one will use. So it was really, again, very simple. You think this is an easy thing. Just make sure everyone's at the table. But there's more to that. It's ensuring that their voices actually impact what gets developed, that they're part of the process, even though they may not see themselves in it, right? So you think of a community-based, someone providing housing services in the community. They may not use any technology, or they may just have a data entry system where they track their members or their clients, but they're not integrating with anything. Or maybe they have monthly reports they give the state or county based on the individuals they serve. And so all of a sudden, we want to invite them to contribute to these data standards project, part of digital, where you're using data, and they don't see. So a lot of it was how to give them a voice, but also give them a space where they see where they add value, right? And so Gravity's success was grounded on that. Even if they weren't, there was a place that they could contribute, they could inform, and they could vote. It was governance was a key priority for the initiative, and it still is, because the data standards are now, as a result, included in national policy, right? They are included in quality measures. So there is a requirement, like health plans are collecting this information that's coded this way. But for us to get there, we had to bring everyone to the table to be. So those are the lessons learned, and making sure that above all, so I do think as the project continues its longevity, is because it stays true to this mission of ensuring the voice is heard and that there is a space, and it doesn't become a top-down, a federal or health plan driven initiative or technology vendor driven initiative. It's everyone coming together to inform the design of the standard.
It's really interesting you say that, because in the approach, I can completely understand the approach and making sure that everyone has a voice, but also going in a data-driven approach and a data-driven mindset. It's becoming a thing that's needed now because we have so many tools to be able to measure data. It's so important to be able to have access to that data as well. And so it's really interesting you said that. I guess looking ahead, how do you envision the future of entrepreneurial leadership in health and social care as AI obviously continues to advance? And what advice would you give to other mission-driven founders navigating digital transformation?
Yeah, there's a lot. I think, again, building back up, AI has left, we have to evolve to it. But I think what's critical, and I say this to my team as well, is really applying these, I would say they're soft skills, but really building off our critical thinking skills, right? As AI is not even its trajectory, right? We see there's always some exponential growth or change. And so for that is really, how do you adapt to that, right? And I really think having a growth mindset is essential. So that's why I say these soft skills that aren't really taught in school, right? They're not something that you learn, within an academic environment. You learn it on the ground in your role, right? And sometimes you can't pinpoint it, but it's really what I always say to the team: we don't solve problems in a linear fashion. If it is something that needs a linear, it's not a problem to solve. It's a project to manage, right? You do a waterfall, you do step, you go through your task, but you really need to think through of how to solve problems in a non-linear way. I think for other entrepreneurs, you asked me what advice I would give. It's hard. As I said earlier, it's not something that you can easily jump into. You do have to have grit. You have to learn how to fail fast, be humble. Don't take it, a lot of what I've seen other entrepreneurs and my lessons learned from them as I was trying to build is like, you have to acknowledge that you will fail and you don't take it personally. It's part of your growth, right? And you could always learn, no matter, and I say this no matter how much of an expert you are in XY, you always can learn from others, right? So I think that you have to do that in your own leadership style. And you have to have, in the world of AI, you have to have technical fluency and cultural humility. Those are my two words, right? I think about them all the time because you have to be able to speak both.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think, there's AI. I do feel enormous potential, but there's risk. So that's why, again, growth mindset, not thinking that, even with ChatGPT, as you mentioned earlier, I do the same thing. I search things, I have it refine, but we know it does mistakes, right? There are hallucinations. And I say to my team, don't take it like a grain of salt. Like, you have to also question it, and you have to go as much as it could be really efficient in creating a one pager that you need. You still need to double check it, right? So I think that's the part I would say. Don't, continue to evolve, but don't let it outsmart you. The other part I know from entrepreneurship, you and I had talked about previously, is really how can we encourage more women, in particular Latina women, as a Latina founder myself, to go into digital health or digital transformation. There's not a lot of us. There's not a lot of us in digital transformation to begin with, in AI, and not a lot of us in health IT. So for me is like, how do I better promote, encourage other women, new leaders, evolving leaders to really give it a chance, right? And, often is the informatics route, which is fine as well, but it's like, there's so much opportunity. So I feel like there is, again, not to think that there is a cookie cutter role, or as an entrepreneur, you need to be able to do all the things. You're going to learn. And what we've learned from also the AI trajectory is that it's not black or white. So I would say for any new founder that you're not going to have all the solutions up front, right? And I've said this to many others that have asked me, I've been kind enough to ask me my experience. I say, you're not going to have the answers right away, but surround yourself with people that you can ask for feedback on and learn from it. And I do hope that we will have more Latino, more having of my own background, having more folks engage and start their own.
I absolutely love that. And there's so many lessons there, lessons learned and advice to give aspiring entrepreneurs, future entrepreneurs, those in careers at the moment, maybe in sectors where they might think going and taking the plunge. It's always, every single person I speak to that's run a business always says it's not for the faint-hearted. It's is hard. You will fail more times than you succeed, but the times that you succeed makes it worthwhile. And I heard someone the other day say entrepreneurship is failing more times than you succeed, but people only see the success, right? And they don't see the failures that happen to get to that bit. So I think it's really interesting, and understanding that it's okay to fail, and just make sure that you don't stop and you don't give up, and you're constantly moving forward and going and plowing through. I think that is a huge lesson that it might not necessarily, I think we're brought up fearing doing that, right? And we're fearing of making a mistake. Or we've got these in our tests, we've got 90% or 85% or something, but what did you get wrong here? Like, how can you improve, right? And so that's the society that we live in. But often the most successful entrepreneurs learn to fail fast, fall fast, and then pick themselves up quickly as well. And so I think it's really,
I just want to add, because you reminded me of something that I always say all the time too, don't let perfect be the enemy of good.
yeah.
Absolutely. Sometimes and I'm surrounded by people that won't move forward until it's like perfect. And then it ends up, it creates a barrier. And for me, it's like, sometimes it's just good enough. At least you get it out the door, or you can ask for feedback on it and it moves forward. And, and I think in today's society, people are so afraid. They're afraid of being judged, but it's also building that shield, big fan of Brene Brown, and being able to acknowledge that feeling and not let it drive, not let it impact you or define you. That was the word I was like, define, right? So you are also experience others that may take failure as, they may take it personally, right? And part of it is really encouraging. That's part of your journey. And if you're ready to do that, because we also have to acknowledge there's people who cannot function in an environment like that and will be really hard. So this is entrepreneurship is not, and that's okay too, right? That's okay. But it's being able to have that mindset.
Yeah, your failures don't define you, right? And being able to move forward that way, I think that's great. This segment of the podcast we like to call the Entrepreneur's Room. We ask a series of questions that we like to ask all of our guests, and it gives our viewers and listeners an opportunity to understand how business owners and leaders think and operate in their business. So the first question I like to ask at this stage of the podcast is, how are you currently spending your days as a leader of the business?
Most of my time, I would say, besides doing for client delivery and managing the day-to-day operations, I think as you in a leadership executive role, it's really coaching your team, right? So I would say, which is not something you also hear, it was a first lesson for me as I started growing my business. So I mentioned I was independent, and as we had more people join and I started building the team, I realized most of my time is spent coaching the team, advising. So I do that professionally. Personally, work-life balance is really important for me. So I think either that we can't ignore. And I've learned in my career trajectory, making time for yourself really is important, or else you can't bring your best person to work the next day.
I think that all is so interesting. I think for me as well, I resonate with that coaching element that you mentioned. I think the hardest part for me when I first started the business was teaching, like coaching employees, team members, and kind of like working through and growing that team, right? And actually coming into that leadership role and having to go, okay, well, I need to trust that someone else can do this so I can do something else, right? And it's really interesting that
I'm still learning to let go.
Yeah, hardest thing, I'll tell you that right now, is the hardest thing to let go, especially because you start it and then you get to a certain point and then it's like, well, no, if you want to move to the next level, you have to understand that you can't grab onto everything in the organization. So it's really interesting. What are the most important metrics for your business, for you as a leader of the business? And I know you're data driven as an entrepreneur. So what do you look at when you're looking at the business? What's the most important things?
So with my business, and this is where I differ with my husband and co-founder. He's very client, and I'm as well, very client driven. So client metrics, client satisfaction, repeat, so a lot of our growth is repeat customers, repeat clients, word of mouth, right? So because we don't have a marketing, we don't have a BD, like we're still scrappy, I would say, or I'd say very lean small business, right? So we don't have. So for us, client engagement, client satisfaction is a key metric. But for me personally, as a servant leader, I really care about my team, how they feel, whether they feel they're in a safe environment, there's potential for growth. So for me is having a satisfied team and workforce, right? The ones that have an opportunity to learn and grow. And that's, something I'm always going to gravitate towards first, because I believe it's sort of like the other way around. Like, so you have my husband thinking client satisfaction leads to high performing teams. Well, I think high performing teams lead to, so we're a yin and a yang, but it works. But that's really what I look.
Yeah, I think that's quite an interesting one. It's like, it's the chicken or the egg, which one came first, right? It's really interesting. You mentioned that you don't particularly do marketing. You guys are still quite scrappy, right? You don't do BD, you don't do marketing, which is always interesting. And I feel like it'll be interesting to hear how, especially for our viewers and listeners, exactly what you're currently doing. How are you currently growing the business? If you're not doing business development activities, if you're not marketing, and you said primarily you're growing through client retention and word of mouth, how did you get that traction? What were you doing? Are you going to conferences? Were you networking? How exactly did you build that traction, and how have you got it to where you are today?
Yeah, no, good question. So yes, it's been as subject matter experts, and throughout my trajectory, I've been fortunate to be invited to present or submit and, get accepted to present at national conferences. So that's always been a good, it is good marketing. You're able to expose yourself, your skills, your projects. And so other people hear from you. So I would say that's been a primary tactic, right? Of being invited, speaking, and then being, even on these as I mentioned to you, I've been on many other podcasts where people ask me questions and to share more about our work and our team, and encouraging them to submit abstracts and present and be engaged in national and international, because we have had the opportunity to present at international levels. I think it's building off that. We do need to do more. It's part of our strategic plan is how can we, really strengthen our marketing, get our message out there, right? Do more of it, especially as we transition out of like the data, like I would say on the health team, where we've been doing more of federal and health data interoperability and standards, which I love, near and dear to my heart, but it's really more about how do you position it as problem solving, human-centered systems thinking. We want to do more of that, but we're in the process of better defining that domain and that capability within our team.
It's always nice to hear the way an organization's growing and the strategies and what it works. And even if it's scrappy, to understand, okay, well, this is the way it needs to be done sometimes, right? And this is the way you need to go. And obviously being subject matter experts, it massively helps in being called to a conference and standing and getting that exposure. So it's always quite interesting. You obviously previously at the top of the podcast spoke about some of the advice you would give to entrepreneurs and things like that. You've been in business for over since 2009, since you were independent, so many, many years. What's the number one biggest lesson you would want to pass on to another business owner, entrepreneur, aspiring entrepreneur, leader? What's that number one lesson that you would go and share?
Well, that's a good question. The motto that I have on my board here is always strive to be better, not the best. Strive to be better. And I think I did learn that from Brene Brown. So it builds off what I said earlier around, as an entrepreneur, don't be afraid to fail, but fail fast and not take it personally. Odd of if you end up having this resentment, or you feel like you are down that on your own capability, you're never going to advance, right? And you're going to be afraid to take the risk needed to move forward. I'd say that's part of it. And be true to yourself, right? For me, my values are trust and integrity. So it's always like someone meets, this is what you get. I am, as my husband would say, I wear my heart on my sleeves, but I'm still going to be savvy about how I make decisions. And so it's not like just because I'm seen as a servant leader doesn't mean I'm not going to hold you accountable for delivering on what you say you'll delivering or performing at where I expect you to be performing. But I am going to listen to you first, right? So for any leader is that if you do want to be a leader, because I also say this, you can start a business and be very successful and be an independent and not have a team, right? You're just one of one, right? But once you start adding people to your team to build it and grow exponentially, you are no longer one of one, and you have to change the way you manage and interact with your team so you collectively grow and sustain the business.
So interesting. I absolutely love that. Last question before we end the podcast, Evelyn. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I like to end every single podcast with this question. If you had a magic wand you could wave to solve one business problem, what would that problem be?
You didn't ask me this one. There's so many. What business problem? I think, right. So if I could, like right now, what I'm dealing, the business problem of being able to identify new business opportunities, right, that match our skill set. So some of that is harder because you don't have visibility, you don't have capacity to be able to see what are the multiples. So for me is like, and I don't know, what that we have on the federal government consulting, but often I feel like there's so many, sometimes someone would be like, oh, we had this problem and somebody else solved it this way. And I'm thinking to myself, I could have solved that better, faster, cheaper. So I think it's visibility from a business perspective, visibility to the problems that need to be solved. So I think that is something that I want to get better at, but it's what I feel right now. It's not, I don't have a magic tool or magic wand myself to be able to identify and prioritize those opportunities in an efficient manner.
Evelyn, that was a really great conversation. Absolutely loved a lot of what you had to share with us, and you shared some great insights. Really appreciate you spending time today and sharing your insights today. For our viewers and listeners listening out there that might want to get in touch, reach out, where would they go? Where can they find you?
I think you have my email. It's hello@emiadvisors.net is our general inbox, but please look me up on LinkedIn and reach out, and happy to respond.
Yeah, we'll put everything in the description of the podcast so anyone can reach out. But yeah, Evelyn, absolute pleasure having you on. It's been great.
Thank you. It was lovely to speak to you. Thank you so much.
No worries. Bye.